I think you're right. I think the longer-term outlook for inflation is still quite uncertain. A lot of, we don't know much about where oil prices, commodity prices are going to eventually settle down. In our baseline, we assume that they stay high. We are not calling for a U.S. recession, for example, for next year. Recession risks have gone up, but we don't think it's our baseline expectation. So commodity prices stay high, and that will keep global inflation at elevated levels. And for ASEAN, that means that inflation may come off from the peaks, but it will still remain high relative to the historical context and should remain high relative to where central banks want to see them. That brings me to the second question on ASEAN central banks. Where are they? Actually, with the exception of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, most of ASEAN central banks have not reacted in terms of policy reaction. So they risk falling behind the curve in the context of where we are. Increasingly, global central banks are making the focus is shifting towards fighting inflation, even the cost of growth. And I think ASEAN, by and large, has come a long way in terms of the COVID recovery, and central banks should be getting ready to look beyond growth and look beyond supporting growth and looking at inflation. Not just, people ask, how is central bank hiking going to affect inflation that's caused by energy? But it's beyond that. It's about anchoring inflation expectations. It's about sending a signal that, the policy rates that we have in ASEAN, no longer are warranted given where we are in the growth and inflation cycle. So we do see ASEAN central banks slowly coming around to the tightening bias, starting with perhaps the Malaysian central bank next week. We are calling for a hike from them. And for the other ASEAN central banks, we do see rate hikes from the second half of the year. Finally, just one exception would be Thailand, for example, because I think Thailand has been, big laggard in terms of the growth recovery. So we do think that they can afford to stay on hold for a bit longer.
Do you see in any of these ASEAN economies, Mohamed, the risk of social unrest as a result of spiraling cost of living? And, naturally, if there's social unrest, and that can then lead to things like political upheaval and even further economic upheaval.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a big risk, especially when it comes to food inflation, because food inflation hurts the poor and the lower income more. And in countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, food inflation, food consumption accounts for a big proportion of what people generally spend their monthly expenditure on. So it's very, very close to heart of the people. So it is a big risk. If we do see big surges in food inflation in our region, we can't rule out the risk of social unrest. Having said that, ASEAN food inflation in particular has been a little bit less volatile, more contained than in the past, because we depend a lot on intra-regional trade, and there is a lot of government support in place to keeping food inflation contained. It's not all good news. Eventually prices will have to adjust, and but the hope from the government perspective would be to allow for these adjustments to happen in a gradual fashion. It's usually the big sharp jumps that leads to a lot of unhappiness on the street.